Okay, so the first question is, what is the value of archaeological excavations in general, and then specifically for Judaic studies?
Okay.
Or biblical whatever
Studies.
you want to call it.
So I think that archaeological studies are a good complement to historical studies, in the sense that when you read history, it comes at you, the general approach is that this is reflecting sort of maybe elite culture, maybe male culture, but it's always written by the victors. And so there's whole swaths of people and of life that are not really reflected in history. So, you can find out about what the kings and the queens were doing and what all the elite were doing, but you don't necessarily know what the average person was doing. So I think the big advantage of archaeology is that we have the opportunity to really reflect and find the remains of just everybody. Certainly we can excavate a palace, we can excavate a temple, but there's a lot of emphasis, particularly today, in excavating a farmstead, and investigating, just the daily lives of regular people. And the number one find that we find at archaeological sites is ceramic remains, like pots. And pottery was something that everybody used. It was ubiquitous. Again, a king or a queen, they would have fancy pots. But the average person still had to use pots for storing food, for preparing food, serving food, eating food. And so everybody was using it. And so I think the great thing about archaeology is that it reflects sort of the general population as well as the elite population. And it reminds us that, most of us are not necessarily in the elite. And so you get a sense of what, the majority of the people were like.
And for biblical studies?
And for biblical studies, again, I think that, the Tanakh, it's about the Jewish people. It's not, even though when you read, say, Shmuel, Aleph, or Malachim, and these are really kind of annals that were being kept, recording the lives of the kings and of the important events in their reigns. So I think archaeology, again, provides a really, really nice complement, in the sense that archaeology reminds us that the average people, they were farmers. They lived an agricultural lifestyle. And so when we excavate, we see that aspect of it. And we're reminded that it's not all just, wars, battles, and palace intrigue and that type of thing, but that we were able to really reconstruct kind of daily life. We see the foods that they were eating, we see the houses that they were building, and get a great appreciation that for most of, for this early part of Jewish history, probably even up until the early Middle Ages, Jews were basically self-sufficient. The family was a self-sufficient unit. The family had to build its own house. The family provided all of its clothing. The family provided all of its food. And this is what we can see on an archaeological site.
And what has this site, Safi, contributed to our understanding of the milieu, the biblical story?
Okay. So this is a wonderful site. I think the first thing that anybody coming to the site would notice, and I'm actually looking at the upper tell right there, and we have the lower tell spread below us, and the Emek Elah right to my left here, is you get a sense of the scale. This is a huge site in the ancient world, something on the order of 500 dunams, which is probably 10 times the size of Jerusalem in the Iron One period.
Wow.
So it gives you a sense that the Philistines were formidable. I mean, they were even though they're just in the southern coastal plain, they're a real power. They built large cities that were fortified, and cities that were, again, the city itself was very self-sufficient and would have dominated the region. And so I think that, working at Gath and knowing that here we are really kind of at the beginning of the foothills, you get a sense of what the Israelites living in the hill country must have felt when they kind of looked down from the hills to the foothills and knew that there was this huge city there with a population that was very well organized and quite affluent, on a relative scale. And so you were dealing with, a culture that was different, but in other ways it was similar. So it was different because, of course, we know from here that they ate pork, they actually ate dog. We know from Tanakh that they weren't circumcised. But in other ways, their lifestyle was similar. The rest of the diet was very similar. Very strong emphasis on wine. They were also producing olive oil to use for their light. All the legumes that they ate, the wheat, the barley. I mean, these were things that were common to this whole area. So in some ways they were, and the ceramic evidence, which at the beginning when the Philistines first arrived, was so strikingly different from what is being unearthed in the Israelite sites. Later on, we see one of the most interesting things is we're so used to wherever Jews are that they assimilate to the local culture. And here at Safi, we have evidence that it's the Philistines actually who are assimilating into kind of the larger Judahite culture over time.
In what way?
So in what way is that they adopt kind of the Judahite style of pottery. It becomes much less Philistine, much more Judahite. At the site a number of years ago, we found some Philistine writing, and we see that they're writing using the alphabet. Most likely, we assume that over time that they probably even adopted circumcision, because if you in Tanakh later on, they're never referred to as the uncircumcised in the same way that they are in the early periods. The horned altars that we see them use, that's something that they're borrowing from Judah. So, and probably so in language, dress, and other kinds of customs, they became more Judahite.
There's a mention in, I think it's in Shoftim, Yoshua, that we were not able to the Judeans were not able to really defeat the Philistines who were around her because they had Rechev Barzel, and iron chariots or something. Is there any evidence of that? Do we know anything about that?
So that's actually a really timely question, because right behind where I'm working, they have what they consider one of the earliest kind of iron workshops in the land of Israel, and it's Philistine. I definitely recommend that you go take a look. So it does seem that, well, I don't know about the chariots. We don't have any evidence of that. The one thing about iron, of course, is because it rusts, it's very rare for you to find actually ancient iron. Over time, it just disintegrates. Even if you find today, you can find some bullets from 48, and they're already, mostly rusted. So you can imagine from 3,000 years ago, you're not finding much. But what we do find are the remnants, the detritus, the leftovers from the iron forging process, the slag and things like that, and also the crucibles in which it was forged. So that we have, and that's taking place right behind me. They're expanding this, and it appears that this is the earliest attestation in the land of Israel for iron use. And so it seems that the Philistines did have a little advancement on this technology. We don't know if they're the ones who kind of invented it, or if they got knowledge of it from the Hittites.
Bring it from where they came from.
Brought it where they came from. But it does seem that they kind of had this technology before it spread to other parts of the land of Israel.
So a lot of these things illuminate aspects of the Philistines that we hear about in Tanakh. Can you help capture what the contribution of this site is to... Did we answer that? To kind of sum up, what are the things that... I think you've answered those questions pretty much. So my last question is based on what is found here. What can a teacher abroad, or who can't actually come to the site, do differently when teaching Tanakh with this information that's now available? So
I think that what archaeology, sort of the essence of it, is really the material remains, right? So we have two main types, right? You have the portable remains, things like the ceramics and any kinds of small finds that we can take away, and we have the architectural remains. And so I think being able to, that's where you can really advance the teaching, I think, is through using the material items, either as replicas or showing pictures, but to give the sense to people that in so many ways their lives weren't that. Look, the history is a foreign country, meaning, right, they did live different lives than we live today. But in some ways there is an essential humanity, and that they still had to, achieve their daily needs. And that's much of what they, just like today, much of what their lives revolved around was making sure that there was enough food to eat, that there was a home, a house, a shelter above them. They needed clothing, and then we get a little sense of the personality of, when you find some kind of exotic items or something that they made that is unique to them. And so you see there was also this human need to creative expression, as well as to hold on to something that maybe makes you a little bit differently. But I also think what archaeology will forces you to confront is that, again, in Tanakh, this is an agrarian society. It is, most of the people are living as simple farmers. And that's and in fact, that's the life that's reflected in the Mishnah and in the Talmud. And I think we kind of tend to forget that. We think of Jews as always being, urban, living in these cities, merchants, traders, and involved just in commercial activities. And the truth is that for the first, at least 1,500 years of our existence, more than half of our existence from the time of, if you want to go back to King David or a little bit before, we were farmers. And that's what's reflected at these kinds of sites.
So to sum up, what is your message to a student or a teacher who are considering coming to a dig?
So I would say definitely come. It's something that, we have at this site, all ages, everybody can participate. And the amazing thing about it is we really do not know what we're going to find. And the only way to find what's here is to dig. The only way to find out. So that's what we, I think just being able to touch the material, to get a sense of the earth that the people were living in, and to touch the material culture, and to hold the vessels that they were using, to find a lamp that that somebody used to light their room so that they could, maybe read by or work by, to touch a grinding stone and realize that this is what, women were spending so many hours of their day leaning over, grinding the flour into wheat so that she could make the bread for her family. I think it really brings you close to the actual life, the daily life of what the characters of Tanakh, what it was like then.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Right. My pleasure. Thank you.